I first arrived in New York City earlier this year just in time to experience a hell of a snowstorm. I was low-key thrilled about it at the time, having not seen snow in years, and I think it even contributed to why I had such an easy time finding an apartment. I guess I was one of the few willing to brace the winter winds and slippery sidewalks to evaluate living situations at that time of year. I ended up at a huge rental in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, a journey I documented here on YouTube, and I ended that video with this. I can't wait to decorate and DIY this place up. I have been watching a lot of HGTV while I've been in this hotel room. I think that's what I'm going to be turning this channel into. Obviously, I did not. I'm Elaine. This is Elaine is XYZ, and I'm actually on my third iteration of this vlog that I've been trying to film since probably October. Look, basically 2022 was a bit of a mental health mess for me. I have personally felt a little unmoored this year. I have always had a brain that is very distractible and very prone to intense, prolonged feelings of sadness. And multiple moments in 2022 seemed to trigger both my ADHD and depression to spiral in ways that were really not fun. And I was white-knuckling through most of the year, hurtling from feeling very empty to feeling very anxious to feeling guilty about feeling bad, and then feeling guilty about feeling guilty because, you know, you're supposed to know better and have compassion for yourself like you keep on telling other people to. And why can't you ever follow your own advice, you idiot? God damn it. Well, at the same time, you know, working on setting myself up in the city again, rebuilding a nest, keeping connected to old friends, trying to make new ones, and all the time doing my job well enough so that nobody there would be like, gee, Elaine acts like she has ADHD and is chronically depressed. Long story short, maintaining that veneer of being okay in front of everyone else as I continued to spiral into some dark, dark places kind of made it hard to really maintain these little creative projects that I do for myself. You know, these videos, this newsletter I had, even completely private things like discovering new music or house decoration. Now, in October, realizing that I was making absolutely no progress in writing any kind of script about anything else, I decided I kind of had to lean into talking about my mental health a little more frankly. And so, on my first attempt, I wrote something that was basically me trying to summarize everything I'd been feeling these last, at that point, 9 months, and how it related to the various disabilities I've dealt with my whole life. I had the semi-clever idea to structure it alongside the various criteria I'd utilized for my last big video, finding an apartment in New York City. Like how the desire to kid out this 2-bedroom apartment, one of my main criteria at the time, had been affected by my ADHD. How the enjoyability of nearby amenities had been basically ruined by my anxiety. How, and this is fun and super emo, the one thing that I could say about this neighborhood that had been mentally healing were the long walks through Greenwood Cemetery. Yes, the gigantic graveyard that I'd been pretty excited to explore due to its connection to the history of parks in the city. I did go there to touch grass and graves a lot this year. It turns out that when you're feeling incredibly distracted, anxious, and sad, it helps to have a physical reminder that everything ends one day. If you accomplish a lot in your life, you're still going to be just one story amongst many billions. If you don't accomplish a lot in your life, there's still a chance to look pretty good after you're dead. So, maybe just relax a little. About 400 words in, I realized that it was way too convoluted and long, and I wouldn't be able to get through editing it without dying of boredom. So why would I subject anyone else to that? And so my tack in November was to rework sections of it into their own more contained videos. Instead of trying to tackle all my issues at once, I'd give a bit more structured time to each of them and maybe also be able to throw in some factoids. Up the usefulness, make it not just about me. I was about 90% done actually with my first one, which would have been about this apartment and what it says about dealing with ADHD in general, but well, something just really stopped me from wanting to put the finishing touches on it. In the video, I went into how an ADHD brain felt compared to a regular brain, how I'd struggled to get diagnosed and medicated, and how that related to many other people's struggles at this time, and how the medication that I finally got wasn't the panacea I had initially felt like it would be, and how much that hurt to find out. And how I was probably going to struggle with ADHD forever. And how much anxiety that caused me, which was great because anxiety was what I was going to go into in my next video. And I don't know, yes, I did feel all those things, and it is my truth. And maybe it is also very relatable and good to put out there, but is it really all of my truth? First off, let me remind me that me, like everyone else, is going through this ongoing state of crisis. Like everyone else, my life took a steep left turn in 2019, and like everyone else, every move I've made since then has been trying to find my footing again. Rerouting myself around or away from the plans I made 4 years ago. Not to mention, the pandemic isn't the only paradigm-shifting problem our world is facing. You've got climate collapse on one side, and another Cold War on the other side. Heck, Hawk's threatening another hot war on that side. And I have to constantly pay attention to that because my job is literally rubbing up against those subjects on the daily. Secondly, let me remind me that my dread wasn't just existential. Last year actually also started off kind of weird for me as an Asian woman. Winter of 2022 coincided with 2 high-profile murders of Asian American women, both around my age. The first was Michelle Go, who was pushed into an oncoming subway car near Times Square. The second, Christina Yuna Lee, was very brutally murdered in her apartment in Chinatown. And while my demographic was somewhat lucky in that the attacks against us didn't get that deadly again, it's also not like the attacks stopped. Also, my closest subway station was featured in the news in April because some old fogey with a crazy grudge decided to shoot it up randomly. He had a YouTube manifesto hating on women. Big surprise. I'm not gonna pretend like that didn't color the rest of my year a little bit. So the world is on fire. Why should I bother feeling ashamed of struggling with my neurodivergence when even neurotypical people are struggling? But then, especially while going through the footage that I did film, it kind of hit me. The way I was talking about it made me actually kind of take a step back and ask myself, has the last year really just been me struggling against my own brain? Is everything I consider a part of an ADHD diagnosis actually really that awful? Yes, I'm not neurotypical, but saying I'm neurodivergent leans so hard into the disability of it when I realized I'm not even always convinced that it's truly a disability. Let me explain. So, in the vein that it takes all types to form a society, there's a lot of science to point to both ADHD and at least the propensity towards depression as being kind of useful for the species on the whole. There's this fun term that I've seen a lot of recent therapist content creators use for people who don't fit the characteristics of typical neurological development. It's a little cheesy, but I like it a lot. And it's neurospicy. And the reason I like it is it reframes how I should be feeling about these two mental loads that I've carried around with me all my life. Maybe if neurotypicality is the carby staple of day-to-day civilization, not having a brain that works in the same way is the salt, the sour, the heat that makes everything less bland, more actually palatable. ADHD brains tend to want to explore, try new things, be creative, especially in high-stakes, high-adrenaline situations, which is probably why so many famous athletes, artists, actors, and musicians have now come out of the woodwork to talk about their own struggles with their ADHD diagnoses. And as for depression, well, people tend to only use the word depression when someone has gotten to that fully debilitating state, the one where you can barely get out of bed for days on end. And yes, that has happened to me too. But just like ADHD overwhelm, where you're thinking so many thoughts at once that you literally feel paralyzed, is near the bottom of a spiral that, yes, your brain is constantly watching the edge of. There's a lot of stages of sadness you go through before you get to full-blown screw-it-all depression. What the depression then usually manifests as, for me, is just this ongoing tinge of sorrow, a tendency towards melancholia. There's this scholar and author of a book called Against Happiness in Praise of Melancholy, so you probably can guess where he falls on thinking about this. But I really liked his definition. Eric Wilson, the author, describes melancholia as a turbulence of heart that results in an active questioning of the status quo, a perpetual longing to create new ways of being and seeing. And maybe this is slightly anecdotal, but I do feel like in the history of our society and arts and culture, people with that tendency towards melancholia have tended to uncover more beautiful insights on the human condition. I think there's a lot behind the James Baldwin quote. The things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all of the people who were alive, who had ever been alive. I think it'd be really hard to be an activist, to advocate for other people, if you weren't at least somewhat colored by sadness yourself. And speaking of creativity again, that whole trope of the tortured artist. I mean, scientifically, it seems like there's some evidence to back up that it's not just a trope, it's actually kind of true. One famous metadata study from 2017 of the composers Liszt, Beethoven, and Mozart looked at the letters they'd written to their friends throughout their years, determining their emotional state by analyzing the types of words associated with depression and sadness. And it turns out that the times when they expressed how sad they were the most was also when they were delivering their best works. In general, it seems, people who are drawn to the arts may have different brains. A 1993 study found that people who work in creative fields tend to be 8 to 10 times more prone to quote-unquote mood disorders than people in other fields. And when I thought about it, I saw this reflected in the people I've been closest to in my life, who I've been able to find an immediate connection to, and who I've really probably admired the most. Most of them act like me and tend to have various levels of ADHD or depression. And these close friends are genuinely, objectively caring, kind, good people who tend to be very creative and work on really cool, fascinating things. And I love that. I actually want more of that in my life, not less. All of which brings me back to why I like the term neurospicy. It's a lot more empowering to think of the way you are wired as the tang that offers depth to a key lime pie, the kick to a pasta arrabbiata, the complex curry that makes rice impossible to stop eating. Okay, my neurodiversity is making me kind of hungry. What if, instead of viewing my brain as this bad thing that I need to get control over, I thought of it as a different, powerful in its own right thing that I wanted to actively work with? Find ways to encourage the parts that are actually really wonderful to me while mitigating some of the parts that make just living in this society kind of annoying. And even when that does bleed into becoming, the bad parts of having this brain, like overwhelm and paralysis or, full-blown depression, Well, instead of internalizing it, maybe I should just examine the system at large. More people feeling constantly distracted is deeply tied to our world becoming constantly more distracting. And similarly with depression, the full-blown kind, which I should say is also a comorbidity with ADHD. The journalist Johan Hari wrote a book called Lost Connections, which I absolutely loved, in which he went deep into a variety of factors other than your own brain chemistry that can cause clinical depression. Basically losing your connections to your family and friends and community, losing your connections to this sense of hope for the future, losing your connection to intrinsic values such as love, all the while being forced into a culture that seems to only value you when you are happy and productive. Now, I don't really know how much of my depression, and especially the mental health dip I took this year, is in fact simple brain chemistry versus everything else that's going on in the world. In any case, if there's one thing I want anyone to take from this video, I think it's this. I have a weird brain, but let's be honest here, I've always liked being a little weird. And since trying to force my brain into being unweird has only been very painful and very rude to me, I'm going to try this year to not do that. To work with my brain rather than against it. And maybe in that process, I'll come up with some better video ideas. We'll see, no promises. I can be okay, I think. Any of us can be okay. Like and subscribe if you're interested in seeing how that goes. And anyways, see you next time doing whatever it is I happen to be doing.